Good evening, everyone. I'm Mike Kensler with the Auburn University Office of Sustainability, and we thank you very much for tuning into this webinar. As you'll hear in a video in just a couple minutes, we're one of 100 colleges or universities around the world that are holding similar conversations. Our favorite climate scientist, Katharine Hayhoe, says the single most important thing we can do to address climate change is to talk about it. And that's what we're going to do tonight. Solve climate by 2030 because scientists keep telling us we have till about 2030 to stop putting so much greenhouse gases in the atmosphere and start drawing them down before we start to see even more significant consequences. So we want to have a conversation tonight about what we can do here in Alabama to help bring about a green recovery, identify climate solutions, and create a just transition into a sustainable economy and society. And to help us do that, I'm going to introduce our three speakers, and then we'll show you a video. After the video, each of the speakers will speak in turn. And while they're speaking, if you have questions, type them in the Q&A. And if you see a question you like, you can vote it up so it'll rise to the top of the questions that'll get asked when all three speakers have presented. So kicking us off tonight will be Alan Booker. And Alan is founder and executive director of the Institute of Integrated Regenerative Design. Going next will be Daniel Tait, who's the chief operating officer for Energy Alabama. And then we'll hear from Nina Morgan, who's the climate and environmental justice organizer for GASP, the Greater Birmingham Alliance to Stop Pollution. So one other thing I'll say before we get started is the idea of this is either to catalyze or to energize conversations that are already happening in our state about what we can do to do our part to solve the climate crisis and create a more sustainable, just world for everyone. So with that, we'll show this video and then get into our presentations.
Welcome to the Solve Climate Global Dialogues. You're participating in one of 125 events held across the planet, including in almost all 50 U.S. states, part of a global project called Solve Climate by 2030. My name is Eben Goodstein, and I'm an economist and director of the Graduate Programs in Sustainability at Bard College in New York, the lead organizer for Solve Climate. This last year has been difficult for everyone. As the world looks forward to recovery from COVID, we are focusing tonight on the most important question facing humanity. What can we do in this year in our regions to help solve climate change while supporting struggling communities that have faced widespread loss of life, economic disaster, and joblessness? Worldwide, from Australia to Kyrgyzstan, from Colombia to Malaysia, and from South Carolina to South Africa, Solve Climate audiences are hearing from local experts and young leaders about concrete steps that can really help nations solve climate change while creating much needed jobs and incomes for everybody. The year 2020 was one of the two hottest years in human history, bringing with it massive forest and grassland fires, record-breaking storms and hurricanes, and relentless rising seas. Solving climate is the challenge which the human species must now face. There's hope for the future. Solutions have continued to advance. This year, China committed to building a carbon-neutral economy, while the U.S. rejoined the Paris Agreement. Solar, wind, and battery prices continue to fall, while major car companies have been rushing to electrify the global fleet. Worldwide, movements for Black Lives Matter and Me Too are leading in bringing much delayed and urgently needed justice to the world. Time is short. We have until 2030, 10 years to solve climate. We can get a lot done in this decade. We have the solutions, but only if we focus the world on climate solutions and justice, and then do the work we have to do in our own cities and regions. For students listening, you are the leaders. Without you, the future we envision will not come. I'm asking tonight for your help. We're going to discover powerful ideas for climate solutions and climate justice and how you can be a part of the solution. But this message must reach beyond those of us who are listening right now. Would you ask all your teachers this week in every subject to make climate a class? The teacher can assign tonight's webinars homework for the students, and then afterwards have a one-class period discussion. And we mean every subject, from art to engineering, psychology to business, dance to chemistry. Teachers don't need to be a climate expert to lead a discussion about climate change. The Solve Climate Project has easy-to-use teacher's guides in nearly every subject and in 3 languages to help teachers make climate relevant to their class. It only takes courage. Don't take no for an answer. Ask them, why not? This is your future. You'll be surprised how many teachers will say yes and thank you. Imagine you, thousands of leaders like you around the world asking their teachers once every school term to make climate a class. That means every term going forward, hundreds of thousands, millions of students worldwide in their classes talking about climate solutions. COVID has shown how fragile our global economy and society are to extreme events. It's also shown that vulnerable people are facing the hardest, most damaging impacts. This is also true with climate change. Science has made it clear that unchecked, global warming will mean an unending onslaught of extreme events, causing untold suffering for humanity and all creatures, species driven to extinction, a planet of environmental refugees. And yet, in many ways, this is the most exciting time to ever be alive as a human. We have the tools and networks and technologies to rewire the world with clean energy, reimagine the global food system, reinvent transportation, and regenerate forests and grasslands, and be well on our way to solving climate by 2030. Tonight, we will learn how to do this in our own cities, our own towns, our own regions. Thank you for the work you will do to promote climate solutions and a just world.
There's no question every act we undertake makes a difference. And so to kick us off, Alan is now going to talk to us about the green recovery portion of this conversation. Alan?
Well, good evening, everyone. Let me bring up my slides real quickly. There we go. Well, you know, I've been an engineer now for about 3 decades, a little over 3 decades, and I started looking at and trying to figure out how we were going to solve some of the larger scale problems that we're facing. Maybe about 20 years ago, I started realizing exactly how much damage a lot of our built environment, a lot of the way we were designing the infrastructure of civilization, you know, how it was being done. And, you know, over the last few years, the climate crisis has really gained a lot of visibility. There's been, you know, a lot of discussion, but from my background, having studied systems engineering and being a systems engineer for almost 3 decades, I can't really look at the crisis of climate in an isolated fashion. It, to me, really is just one symptom of a really much larger set of issues that we're looking at. You know, if you go to the doctor and they're trying to figure out a problem and it has half a dozen different symptoms, and all the doctor's interested in doing is prescribing medication to try to manage, you know, one symptom or the other, then the likelihood of getting down to the root cause of that problem and solving it so that those problems don't keep coming back goes, you know, is very low. And so, you know, I'm looking around and I'm saying, yeah, what human technology and human civilization has been doing to the Earth's biosphere has been systemic, and climate is just one of those symptoms. You know, we have we've gotten to the point now where the biomass on the planet is now weighs less than the amount of technological artifacts that humans have produced. We have taken the amount of natural biomass on the planet and have really reduced it by many estimates by more than 50% over the last few centuries. In so doing, we have unbalanced a huge amount of the systems dynamics that hold the Earth in the Earth's biosphere into a set of feedback loops that keep it well regulated and self-regulated. What we're seeing now is we're seeing that these feedback loops are beginning to become weaker. Positive feedback loops are starting to show up, and we're starting to drive the Earth's biosphere out of self-regulation. So we're seeing more, obviously melting of Arctic ice, more flooding, more desertification. We are, by many estimates, in the 6th great extinction. And we're seeing this cascading set of problems with the Earth's biosphere. So when I'm looking at it and thinking about it, I really think we have to look at this as a complete set of issues, of which climate change is just really one dimension. And as climate change has gotten more and more attention through protests, through a lot of academic attention and so forth, a lot of proposed solutions have been floated. And I've been in the engineering field now for long enough that when I look at a lot of these things, what really occurs to me first is that a lot of these proposed solutions, they're really coming out of somebody trying to figure out how they can monetize this whole problem. There's a lot of large-scale infrastructure proposals that have popped up. Things like, oh, well, let's just build a lot of huge machinery to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere. Or let's do solar geoengineering and modify the amount of incident solar radiation that can actually come down out, through the upper atmosphere and the ionosphere and hit the Earth and so forth. First, none of these solutions have ever been proven out at scale. Number two is they are going to have a huge number of side effects that we're not going to be able to predict ahead of time. And scaling up any of them to any meaningful level would be very expensive, very extractive in terms of energy and resources, and have a lot of environmentally destructive side effects. And so really none of those sorts of high tech, so to speak, solutions have I looked at and thought any of them made any sense whatsoever. So when you look at it in some detail, you notice that there's a lot of key issues, including climate instability, that are being driven by disruptions to both the carbon cycle and the hydrological cycle. There's a lot of discussion in climate change that's been around the fact that we have released a huge amount of carbon and greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, but a lot less has been focused on the fact that we are fundamentally disrupting the hydrological cycle. And the more the research is done on the impacts of water vapor, humidity in the atmosphere, the more we realize that the hydrological cycle is a huge moderator of and transfer agent of heat in the atmosphere. And I think what we're going to see as we go forward is that we're going to have to discuss the fact that the hydrological cycles have been disrupted, and we're desertifying huge amounts of the terrestrial biosphere. By some accounts, we are in the middle of desertifying up to 1/3 of the Earth's land mass right now through this disruption of the Earth's biosphere. And so we have to look at both the carbon cycle, how much we've been pulling carbon that's been sequestered in the forms of fossil fuels and burning them and releasing that into the atmosphere, and the amount of hydrological cycle destruction that we've been doing by literally cutting down the forests, destroying Earth's great biomass reserves, destroying much of our rangelands and our grasslands. And unless we discuss all of this at a single large systems scale, we can't really begin to get around to finding solutions that are going to actually work at the level that's going to be required in order for us to, to solve climate by 2030. What it comes down to is we're going to need solutions that can address multiple dimensions at one time. Things that really are only addressing, say, carbon sequestration, and that's all they're looking at. They're not really going to do the trick, I don't think. And so when I look at it and somebody says, hey, we're going to build this big, very expensive, multi-billion-dollar machine that's going to pull carbon out of the atmosphere and try to, pull it down into some sort of stable chemical form that we can sequester, I go, well, that's really interesting, but does your machine also address the hydrological cycle? Does it address all of the other dimensions of ecological, collapse that we're in the middle of? Because what we really need is we need a machine that, instead of requiring us to spend billions of dollars to build it, that instead it builds itself out of available resources on site, that it takes the energy to do so out of available solar energy, that it constructs itself and replicates itself, that new designs for new generations of this machine, they automatically adjust themselves to the environment in which they find themselves, and they reproduce on their own. And we have a name for these machines. They're called trees. We really are not to the point of having any human technology that is remotely as elegant as nature-based solutions for addressing climate change. So what you come down to is that every solution that has been proven to work at scale is a form of a nature-based solution. And the interesting thing to me about nature-based solutions is that whereas the large-scale, gimmicky, high-tech solutions that are being sold have a tendency to enrich and empower the billionaires, the nature-based solutions have a tendency to work at community scale, to be empowering at the local level, to regenerate local economies, and to be able to address questions of equity and social justice as well as climate. So, that to me says that there are many reasons we need to be looking at and focusing on nature-based solutions, and not, looking towards the high-tech industry and things that are, going to basically make the rich even richer at the expense of communities that are already being stressed and impoverished by what we have seen of this ecological set of cascading collapses so far. When I look at the whole conversation and hear this, the questions that come up a lot, one of the things I have to come back to is the fact that humans really are a keystone species. There's been a lot of discussion how, for example, the gray wolf you see here is a keystone species, and when you reintroduce the gray wolf into environments like Yellowstone National Park, very famously, that trophic cascades occur and that a rebalancing of ecosystems happens, and that a huge amount of ecosystem function regenerates itself. And when I see that, it occurs to me that what we've done is we've taken humans who are a keystone species and pretended that we are not a part of the larger environment, that we're somehow separate from and differentiated from the environment that surrounds us. instead of stepping up and recognizing that we are an integral part of the ecosystems in which we are embedded. And that if we step away from our responsibility as a keystone species and do not address the damage that we have done through our project of civilization over the last 12,000 years, that it's going to take natural processes tens of thousands of years to fix the problems that we have created. But in having worked with systems like permaculture and other systems of regenerative design, I've come to realize that if we step up and become involved, that we can oftentimes regenerate in just a few years or a few decades what really would take natural processes thousands of years to regenerate. And we're going to have to do that. So how do we, what do we practically need to do? Well, we could spend a lot of time going through the details, but I'm just going to offer a couple of ideas, things that really occurred to me. Number one is we're going to have to move from monoculture chemical agriculture to polycultured biological cultivation of our foods. The United Nations FOA has stated from their research that it's going to be small organic farms. They're using biological cultivation of polycultures. That's going to be what's going to have to feed the planet going forward. That really what's happening is we're destroying our topsoil all across the planet with monoculture crops on large scale using chemical agriculture. The more I study it, the more I feel that there's absolutely no excuse for this kind of scene where you have to have people in hazmat suits applying the chemicals to what they're now going to tell you is our food supply. And the more I have worked with, studied, and helped with the creation of regenerative agricultural systems, the more I've become convinced that this is a dead end, that it's highly destructive, and that we're going to have to move onward into something that is very different. And that's going to look like polyculture and cultivation of high value nutrient dense crops. Second, one of the things that Derek Jensen has said, a very famous quote of his, is that forests precede us and deserts dog our heels. It's the fact that if you look at this desertification cycle, you realize that industrial plow-based agriculture has been at the leading forefront of desertifying huge amounts of the planet, and that has been one of the main drivers of climate change and of a lot of the ecosystem collapse. So we've got to get out of that whole death spiral of modern agriculture. We must regenerate the biomass of our forests, our rangelands, our grasslands, and that's really the only way we're going to rebalance the carbon and hydrological cycles and get a lot of the self-generating, self-regulating feedback loops in the Earth's biosphere reestablished. We need to create systems that run on the real-time energy of the sun, that create closed-loop nutrient cycles. And in order to do that, we're going to have to drastically reduce our energy use. We need to aim for 80% or more reduction in our base energy use. That will allow us to transition off of fossil fuels and can be done while actually increasing the quality of life for everyone. Now that takes a lot to unpack, and we don't have time to address that right now, but that's something I've become increasingly convinced of as I have worked with people around the world, indigenous people groups that are looking at reestablishing their lifeways. We have examples of doing exactly this, of drastically reducing consumption of energy and resources while at the same time dramatically increasing quality of life. So, really the climate crisis is simply one symptom of the larger ecosystem collapse that we are seeing right now. And so I guess what I would say to wrap it up would be governments and corporations won't make large-scale changes to address these issues unless it's demanded by a broad cross-section of the population, not just a vocal few. So we need to grow the number of voices that are, talking about this, that are asking for these changes. And really what I would say is your way of helping if you want to become involved is first reduce your personal consumption. Look at ways that you can begin to address it at that level, because that sets an example and shows what can be done. Secondly, take and vote with the way you spend your money. Demand products and services that are regenerative. Look for and spend your money with those companies that are really helping to address these issues. And third, help by putting consistent pressure backed by well-articulated reasoning on your local, state, and national governments. And those, I think, are some of the most practical, immediate things we can be doing. I know Daniel's going to be talking next specifically about reducing that energy demand and how we can do that. And I think that's really I'll hand it off to Daniel here in a minute as he begins to help us think about what we can do here in our state to begin to put that exact kind of pressure onto our onto our regulators and get things moving forward in that way. So that's with that, I'll hand it back over to Mike.
Thank you very much, Alan. All right, Daniel. Daniel's going to talk to us about climate solutions, and specifically, as Alan said, as they relate to energy.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I appreciate everybody joining us this evening, and thanks, Alan, for the nice softball there. I really do appreciate that. As everybody mentioned before, I'm Daniel Tait with Energy Alabama, and we work to accelerate the transition here to sustainable energy in the state. I wanted to first preface the point that Mike just made, and you saw that through Alan's presentation, that everything I'm talking about, at least from our perspective as an organization, I'm just an energy nerd. So I know a lot of things about kilowatt hours and therms and all that kind of good stuff. And it's an extremely important part of the larger question that we had to solve, right? But as you saw from Alan's presentation, it's only one. We can do a lot of things in the energy space that have multiple benefits, as he spoke about, that help people as well as it helps to solve an ecological crisis at the same time. But there are lots of other things, even outside of the quote unquote energy world, that need to happen. So I wanted to hit on just a few things that Alan mentioned that were really powerful, I felt like, to me, that relate a lot to the world of energy and how we consume it, what we do with it here, and how we can affect change here in the state of Alabama. He said a few things, and I'm just going to rattle a couple of them off because I was making notes as you were talking there, Alan, about, we have over the probably, many hundreds of years, maybe since the Industrial Revolution, been on this quest of something that we heard in the Lorax, right? Biggering and biggering and biggering. And a lot of the solutions that we're talking about in the energy world, and you see this too in other technologies, right? Where we spent hundreds of years making things biggering and biggering them. And now we're looking at ways that we make networks more distributed when you have things like the internet, or you have things like cellular technology that we're all carrying around. And now in the energy world, where it used to be that everything had to be central power plant stations, and we were going to make a bunch of energy and ship it hundreds of miles to the location where everybody was consuming it. And it does not necessarily have to be that way anymore. We can have more distributed, more community scale benefits. And so the reason that I bring all this up is to say that our energy system is very, when we think about electricity and gas and the things that people consume in their homes and businesses, is very much in this structure, right? That over many decades, if not hundreds of years, we have created a system where a few corporations, and in some cases, I would call them, some of our utilities are agents of the government, right? They are municipal utilities, or they are part of the federal government. So it's not always a private corporation, but we have created these massive behemoths that are designed to provide these services to us. And what we really have to do, right, is begin the process of introducing and relying on community-based solutions, distributed scale solutions that really put the power, pardon the pun, or maybe pun intended, I should say, more so than pardon the pun, back into the hands of the people, right? Rather than just a small set of corporations or government agencies that are making the decisions that affect millions and millions of us, but how can we actually get those benefits back to the people? And so you'll notice as I talk a little bit about things like energy efficiency and renewables, that the voices that are, taxing solar power in the state of Alabama, who are refusing to invest in energy efficiency because they want you to buy more of their product, they are a product of that system, right? Where they need you reliant on the biggering and biggering of their system. And in order for us to truly solve this problem, at least from an energy perspective, we've got to kind of break that cycle. Another thing that Alan mentioned was around the nature-based solutions. So obviously I'm going to talk a lot about solar and wind and things like that, but really cool thing about renewable energy that I want to mention, is not only does it have like the multiple benefits of bringing that back down to the community scale where we can do things literally on homes and business level, or down to the community level, which is just fantastic. But he said, I think I wrote it down, that run on the cycle of the sun, right? And so there's a lot of things that run on the cycle of the sun, and we can also design our systems to run on the cycle of the sun. Something that is a very crude example of that is what's happening in California, where you actually are starting to see so much solar power on the grid at once that it's driving power prices in the middle of the day negative, where there's actually an oversupply of solar power during the day, where effectively it's free energy. So then if you have free energy during the middle of the day, what can you do with that you otherwise would have done at some other time? How do we redesign our systems to take advantage of that? So if we're moving to electric transportation, instead of burning, say, gas and diesel, but actually using clean electricity in our cars and the way that we move around in, say, public transportation, wouldn't it be great to charge those during the middle of the day when we have an overabundance of supply of renewable energy? Of course, right? So we start to rethink literally down to the day by day level of when are we doing things that are putting us as a species, as a society, our communities on the cycle of the sun. So in terms of climate solutions around energy specifically, I mean, I think most people will know, right, that as Alan said, there's two main ways, right? One is energy conservation and efficiency, which are oftentimes lumped together, but they are different, right? Conservation is, let's stop wasting energy. That's what our moms and dads used to yell at us when they said, turn that light off when you run out the door, or I can't believe you left the door open, where you're born in a barn. I had my parents yell that at me. So that's what they're getting at, conservation. Why are you wasting something that you're not even using? We can do a phenomenal job at reducing consumption that we have failed to do, at least heretofore. Second is the energy efficiency piece, which is, okay, modern lifestyle requires us to have the use of energy for certain things that we want to do. And when we're going to do those things, right, can we use as little as energy as possible to give us the benefits that we want? That's what we mean when we say energy efficiency. And then, of course, the big bucket that most people think about is renewable energy. So wind and solar and storage technologies. Again, a lot of really cool storage technologies that are being developed are more nature-based solutions, where something as simple as pumping water or pumping air back and forth during different times of the day or different times of the year, so that you're not even really using materials per se. You're just using the items around you in nature over and over and over again. So those are kind of the two big things. And specifically to Alabama, it will be no shock to anyone on this call, or probably any resident of the state of Alabama, that we are either last or next to last in almost everything. And so I tell everybody, hey, energy is no different. We're used to saying thank God for Mississippi, and in many cases we can't even say that. So when it comes to energy efficiency, we are 50th in the nation in energy efficiency. We have some of the highest energy burdens. When we say energy burden, what we're getting at there is the amount of people's incomes that are actually having to be spent on energy as a proportion of their total income. So we have really high burdens where people are spending a ton of money on energy and not able to have enough left over to make other important investments in their lives, whether that be like education or healthcare, other items that everybody should have access to. And so then you also have on the renewable energy side, I'll put a plug out for Nina's organization, GASP, which has been, excellent at really taking the fight to Alabama Power, to Alabama Public Service Commission about the tax that's on solar. So, again, they need you to bigger and bigger their system. But when you try to, put solar on your home or in your community, there's a tax that stops you from being able to do that throughout much of the state of Alabama. And so organizations like GASP have been fighting hard to get that overturned, and have just a couple of days ago, I believe, or here pretty recently, filed a complaint with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission trying to overturn that because we believe that's an illegal action by the power company and by the Public Service Commission. And so these are really important when you look at how far behind we are in Alabama on energy efficiency, things we can do in homes and businesses, and renewable energy. We have a long way to go. I kind of briefly mentioned earlier about electric transportation. The reason that I bring it up is because, number one, it's sexy. A lot of people like it. And you heard, if you were here earlier, you heard Mike and I talking about electric vehicle rallies, and people are interested in this kind of stuff. And it's just a really cool, fun way to get people engaged and get more people talking about sustainable solutions. But ultimately, electric transportation is more an issue of 1 and 2, the energy efficiency and the renewable energy, right? So if we're doing electric transportation right, the EV itself actually is a highly efficient version, right, of an ICE vehicle, an internal combustion engine vehicle, where the engine is pushing, say, more 90% efficient, as opposed to more like 15 or 20% in terms of the energy going in, what is actually moving rubber down the road, right? EVs are much more efficient. And on top of that, we can power them with renewables if we're designing those systems right. So electric transportation is extremely important, but I view them more as a challenge of efficiency and renewables, because we've got to solve those two problems so that as we deploy more electric vehicles, they're clean. They're the only vehicles that get cleaner over time. If you buy an electric vehicle today, and we're all doing our jobs right, acting collectively to make the grid and everything cleaner, you actually will have less impact when you drive that vehicle 5 years from now than you do today, based on the nature of the electricity that you're using. So in terms of like how to go about these solutions, and I'll wrap it up and kind of hand over to Nina, is much like Alan said, there are, of course, things that you personally can do, but I view this much more as a structural issue, where it's going to take all of us figuring out what we can do at the local, state, and even federal level. So I think one thing that I want to make sure that everybody thinks hard about and tries to find the information, if you don't already have it, is who are your electric providers? Who are your gas providers, if you have them, and potentially getting away from gas altogether and electrifying your home. But a lot of people don't necessarily either know or understand the governance structures of the utilities they have. So here in Alabama, we have municipal utilities. That's action that you can take directly with a local city council, probably, and you can make pretty good progress much faster, right, than having to, say, pass federal legislation to fix a federal utility. And then also we have investor-owned utilities that are regulated by the Public Service Commission, a 3-member elected board, elected service commission, Public Service Commission. So you got to think about, okay, who are my providers of my essential utility services, and how can I make change? Like, what are my levers, if you will, to vote or to have my voice heard, maybe even run for office of electric cooperative and get on the board of directors and help make change. There's all these different ways you can do that. So if I have to give you a piece of homework, it's go find out who your providers are, how's their governance, how are they structured, and figure out where can you plug in that governance structure to actually make your voice heard. And then lastly, and probably even more importantly, because these groups will help you do that, is go find an organization, whether that be GASP. I had to give a plug, of course, for Energy Alabama, but any organization in the state of Alabama that is helping on any of these issues, even if you're passionate about something that's not necessarily energy, go find great organizations that are on the ground doing this type of work, get involved, volunteer, give money if you have it. But these organizations will help equip you with the resources and know-how to make the change that we need at a structural level. And that's enough of Daniel preaching for at least this section. So I appreciate y'all's patience with me, and I'm gonna hand it off back to Mike and then on to Nina.
Well, I will jump in right now. Hard to go behind you, Daniel, and Alan, but I'll do my best. And yeah, so my name is Nina Morgan. I'm a climate and environmental justice organizer for GASP. Been with the organization for almost 2 years now. Alabama native, born and raised in a small town called Sipsey, Alabama. It's a mining town. It's less than a mile away from the McWayne Burton mine. And so, yeah, my personal experience is one of very close proximity to industry and just, experiencing how living really close to extractive industry affects community, affects people in my own family, myself, and our neighbors. So that's kind of my background, and I'm really thankful to just get to be a part of this conversation. So what I'm going to do really quick is I'm going to share my screen, these slides here. Okay, can y'all see my screen? Okay, awesome. And I'll hit present mode. Okay, so yeah, Alan and Daniel really covered a lot of this last presentation and conversation that I wanted to give today on just transition, and yeah, just transition basically is about transitioning away from extraction, transitioning away from all the negative things that have been talked about this evening, fossil fuels and how it negatively impacts us and our planet, and transitioning to a regenerative economy, one that meets the needs of people while really stewarding our planet and taking care of our planet and not destroying the natural systems that we all depend on to live. That's basically what just transition in a nutshell is all about. And so yeah, that's a little bit about what I'm gonna cover today. So just to get us started, and I really like these images because to me, they kind of communicate both like the boldness of wanting and demanding something new for ourselves and for our planet, and also kind of the drudgery of our current economy. So transitioning away from an extractive economy, and if you all give me just a second, I have some notes that I wanted to kind of read off of, and my internet is being a little bit tricky, and I wonder if I can go into a presenter mode on this. Not sure how this looks on the screen. Okay, maybe not. Give me 1 second. Y'all, sorry. I had some thoughts that I typed out, and I'm having trouble pulling them up. Well, let's do this. I don't know if y'all can y'all see my slides still? If I do it this way? Awesome, okay. Okay, great. So transitioning away from an extractive economy. So right now, what you're looking at are images of Alabama, of different scenes in Alabama, based on the work that I do as an organizer with GASP. And also just some scenes that have affected my own community in SIPSI. And so I want to say, first of all, what we mean by an extractive economy is that kind of like what Alan and Daniel were talking about, our whole economy is literally extractive in the sense that we dig up things from the earth, resources from the earth, oil, gas from the ground, and cut down forests, disrupt water cycles and other earth systems, and really create a pipeline of destruction and exploitation of people in our planet, and one that leads to a lot of pollution and contamination. And so our economy right now basically says that the labor and work of people and our basic humanity and land and water and soil and air and all of the resources that are extracted have a price. That's what people mean when they talk about the extractive economy and extractive industries. And on a day-to-day basis, that's what I interact with, in real time every day. I am in communities, coined environmental justice communities, that are bearing the brunt and the externalities of industries that exploit and pollute. And so these pictures are really just images of what I see and what people are living with on a day-to-day basis. And I'm sure that, folks on this call are well aware of the challenges that communities all across the state of Alabama are facing. I work particularly in the North Birmingham community, in the 3 neighborhoods that make up the 35th Avenue Superfund site in North Birmingham, and work really closely with Mr. Charlie Powell, who is the president and founder of a grassroots organization called PANIC. It stands for People Against Neighborhood Industrial Contamination. And we meet every Monday, and every Monday he says he talks about a funeral that he's been to, where people are dying of strokes, where people are dying of heart attacks, asthma attacks, COVID. And we know that environmental justice communities that are facing a lot of the brunt of extractive industry are also more vulnerable to dying from coronavirus. And so, when we have heavy rains like we had, just in the past couple of weeks, there's people who literally cannot leave their yards without having to trudge through water and sewage backup. Like I said, I lived in SIPSI, and in 2019, I think the spring of 2019, the Tyson rendering facility had a spill, and there was a huge die-off of hundreds of thousands of fish on the Mulberry Fork, which is a tributary into the Black Warrior River. And I grew up swimming and eating fish out of the Mulberry Fork, and my uncles fish there. And so I'm coming from a place of seeing the ways that the extractive economy and the extractive industry actually plays out and manifests itself in real life. And I hear stories all the time of people who are dealing with the outpour of that. Folks living right across the street from coke plants, from coal mines, from landfills and quarries and all sorts of things. And so this is a very real challenge and struggle that people are dealing with and living with. And so we want to move away from that. We want to move away from that. And really, like Alan and Daniel were saying, transform into a regenerative economy, transform our current extractive economy into one that's regenerative and one that takes care of people and planet. And Yeah, and I kind of like thinking about just transition within the context of transformation. Just transition is, it speaks to a set of ideological principles and processes and practices, and kind of outlines you know, how we transform, but ultimately what we're doing is talking about a transformation of our society into something else, something different, something new. And it's really beautiful to think about, and challenging and inspiring and all the things. And there's not a one size fits all approach. That's kind of what I am taking away from our previous panel, is that there's not a one size fits all approach, and that we really can look to nature in terms of developing solutions to get us out of the climate crisis before it's too late. And so what I want to say here is that, yeah, sometimes our imaginations can be a little bit limited because we've been living in an extractive economy. I mean, speaking for myself, that's all I've ever known. That's all most people, everybody on this call has ever known in some way, shape, or form. You know, for centuries, and so for years and years, and so you know, the extractive economy and society and the culture that it has produced has been normalized for a really long time. And so, you know, it's kind of, it can be challenging to think about what like a vision for a new world looks like, but blueprints already exist from the smallest behaviors to the largest visions of a new world, right? And basically, yeah, regenerative economy is about it's the opposite of extractive economy, and it meets everybody's needs. So, you know, what is a regenerative like water system? What is a regenerative housing structure? What is a regenerative economy when it comes to thinking through how to basically take a lot of these industrialized sites that are in residential areas and turning them into something else. One thing that we're thinking about with GASP, which we shouldn't have to, you know, people in power and decision makers and politicians, they represent us, and they should be the ones, you know, kind of working with different agencies and organizations thinking through these things. But alas, at least in Alabama, you often have under-resourced, at capacity, small organizations that are actually thinking through a lot of these big problems and trying to come up with solutions. And so I want to say that, you know, just from my own experience, a lot of these pictures are of work that I have been involved in, and people, you know, right now are thinking through. You have Majadi Baruti and Susan Diane Mitchell with the Smithfield Dynamite Hill Community Land Trust in Birmingham that have a whole blueprint for thinking through how to use all of the vacant land in Birmingham and really building a community scale urban agriculture operation that meets the needs of all Birmingham residents. You have people who are rethinking housing and how to make it affordable, and also quality housing in a cooperative model. You have people who are talking through visions for the whole region, which is why I have a Gulf South for a Green New Deal icon on the slide, because which is something that GASP and I believe Energy Alabama in some capacity are part of, really rethinking, okay, what is building a regenerative economy and trying to kickstart a just transition mean for the South, right? Because we know that the South historically, you know, just like people, you know, always, you know, frame Alabama negatively, people think about the South, and there's a lot of negative connotations when people talk about the South. And so how can we combat that and actually come together as Southerners and think about what just transition and building a regenerative economy mean for our region, which is what the Go South for a Green New Deal is all about. It's a vision for just that. I'm a part of the Birmingham Earth Coalition, whose vision is to really build a climate and environmental justice movement across the state of Alabama by centering justice, racial, economic, you name it. And something else, I guess my last thing that I want to say here is that, in Alabama, people might not be out, I guess, about climate change and talk about it in ways that, like, we do here in this space, the panelists have, but people in Alabama, I think intuitively understand, first of all, that the climate is changing, something about our natural systems have shifted. And also people, a lot of times, especially elders and boomers, already have like certain behaviors that are kind of sustainable. Like, for example, I have a lot of conversations with a lot of boomers and elders in North Birmingham, and what I see a lot of the times is, this resistance to a culture of scarcity where things are wasted, where we just throw away food and just whatever the things we deem as being wasteful. A lot of the times I see people saving, scraps of wood and paper and cans and like using it to build something, using it on their homes, using it, for whatever activities they like to engage in down the line. I see people all the time going to dumps and stuff and like picking up scrap metal to use for whatever. And so our folks know in Alabama, at some level, that sustainability and like the principles of reuse, reduce, recycle, right? Our folks already know about that. People might not express it in the ways that like us regenerative economy nerds express it, but I do think that there is some ethic of sustainability and of stewardship in our state. And so I think it's up to us as people who want to build a movement for a just transition or a just transformation to speak to that, to speak people's language, meet folks where they're at in order to move into something else and to really kind of nudge our people into the direction that we know we need to go into. And I guess my last slide, if you don't take anything away from my presentation, and I'm sorry for the pause at the very beginning, but if you don't take anything else away from what I'm trying to say, please remember that we're talking about a transformation, right? We're living in a very historic time. Something that I have a twin brother, and something that we always talk about is like, what would you do if you were living in the civil rights movement? Or what would you do if blah, blah, blah? Like we're here, we're living in a very historical time, not just because of COVID, but because of there's like a nexus that we're at where a lot of different things are happening at one time. Where, Alan talked about the uproar and movement for racial justice. We've seen historic wildfires, historic droughts, historic floods, and so we shouldn't take lightly the time that we're living in. One question that a really amazing facilitator from the Highlander Research and Education Center always says is like, what time is it in the world? And I think that that's something that we need to be asking ourselves right now. 10 years to solve the climate crisis is not something that we should be taking lightly. So yeah, and I also would like to say that, we have the solutions are already there. We're not dealing with the issue of the lack of there being solutions. We're dealing with a time where there's a lack of political will. And so it is important to build movements. It is important to articulate clearly our visions for where we need to go and why we need to go there. It is I have a picture on this slide of the climate strikes, I believe in 2018. I could have those dates wrong, but a lot of young people in Alabama already are pushing for a change to happen. This is a really great picture of the climate strikes. And when a lot of young people in the state of Alabama came out to demand that we protect our planet, and what you're going to be seeing in the coming months in April and May is really an upswell of movement happening where people from all different walks of life across the United States and in the South are going to be demanding for a change, demanding for justice, demanding for a just transition. And so I would invite everybody, if you're not connected to movement, connect with Energy Alabama, connect with GASP, follow up after this call and try to get plugged in. I like the philosophy of starting locally but thinking globally. And I'm going to land the plane because I know I'm running out of time. But yeah, please do that. And I guess my last thing in terms of ways to plug in and how to take action is to be proximate to communities that are really contributing oftentimes the least to climate change, but burdened with the most negative impacts of the extractive economy. Volunteer, commit to community service, come visit, folks in North Birmingham, drive to a lot of these industrial sites, drive to Miller Steam, which is the largest contributor of greenhouse gases in the country, which is in Alabama. It's in West Jefferson County. Drive up there, see for yourself, and look at the communities that these industrial sites are situated in, and meet people where they're at, and contribute acts of service to these oftentimes fence line communities. So yeah, that's all I have for you all today, and thank you so much for allowing me to speak.
Thank you so much, Nina. And I love the way you summed it up, really echoing what everybody said is, it's going to take all of us. If there's one common theme from what Alan and Daniel and Nina said, is that we have to get involved. Really, we're citizens in a democracy, and we really can create the change we want if we engage with others and take action on the great ideas that are out there. Nina also said there's nothing we need to know that we don't already know, and Alan and Daniel both talked about that a little bit, to solve all these problems and in the process create a transformational world for us all to live in. So let's take a look at the questions, and we will answer them in the order that they've been voted up. And the first question is from David Knowles, and this is to you, Daniel. What role will or can distributive generation of power have in solving some of the issues we're facing today? In your opinion, is it a local energy solution that will help communities in the way that Alan says is necessary, and Nina says is necessary, for creating lasting change rather than a payday for someone?
Yeah, it's a massive, massive part. I mean, so you have to think of, the way I think about it is, you have like a technology issue, right, where you're trying to get the renewables, the distribution of power down to a local level, down to a community level, down to even maybe an individual house level. That's one thing. And then you're also trying to think about where those benefits flow. So if you think about utility companies that charge solar taxes like Alabama Power, they would tell you, hey, we're not anti-renewable energy. And there's probably some truth to that, right? Like, they'll build renewable energy as long as they can make tons and tons of money off of it, as long as you remain captive to them, right? So there's an issue there about where do the benefits flow, and that you could, in theory, do a lot of the things that I talk about in renewable energy, and do them in a way that actually either exacerbates or kind of further cements the systems that we're trying to change, right? So you can do them poorly. Let me give you a couple of examples of how you can do them positively and do them the right way. This is an article that I share, and happy to try to get a copy of it to anyone who wants it on this call, but I love it. It's about a policy that we're trying to change here in Alabama called third-party ownership. That's really about how do we open up access to renewable energy to more people rather than just the folks who have the upfront cash, the tens of thousands of dollars to do it. So they passed a policy like this in Arkansas, and a school district put solar on a lot of different schools all around their district. And they saved a ton of money in the process. What did they do with that money? They gave all the teachers in the district a $15,000 a year raise. Okay. So it's also not just thinking about, like, the word payday is not a bad thing in my opinion, like, but who's getting the payday? Like, are we extracting for the benefit of Alabama Power, for an investor-owned utility, for investors on Wall Street, or are we getting a payday and helping put more of that benefit into the hands of people in our communities, or in that case, directly into the hands of teachers, right? That is phenomenal work that they did in that school district in Arkansas. And another example I'll give you is around, Habitat for Humanity. If you are trying to work with folks to get them on their feet and into home ownership and being able to build generational wealth through that, and making sure that these homes are actually not just livable, but are actually something that's going to build wealth. Well, those folks need to be able to afford the utility bill. It's not just enough to put somebody in a home and then all of a sudden the operational costs of keeping that home running are unaffordable. And that's why you see more and more Habitat for Humanity affiliates, and also people who are working in affordable housing thinking hard about how do we make sure these homes are as efficient as possible, and introducing renewables where possible, so that the benefits of, say, a Habitat home are actually accruing directly to the resident, the person who owns it, as opposed to putting someone in a home and continuing to extract out of that home, out of that family for someone else. Those are perfect examples in my head of how we do exactly that.
Thank you, Daniel. Alan or Nina, do you have anything you'd like to add to that?
I just say that we're to the point now where if we do it properly, that there's no need for any of these Habitat for Humanity homes to actually have a power bill. They should actually be generating more power than they use. We now have the technology to do that. So only other thing I would say is that you have to understand that when you look at the energy use intensity of a building, there's two different ways of looking at that number. One is the amount you consume on site, and then there's another one which is called the source energy use intensity. And when you look at the two numbers, they're drastically different. What you're seeing is that when you look at the amount of energy that's required to be produced at a remote site in order to go through all the inefficiencies of getting it to you, then you'll notice that oftentimes it takes twice or more of the energy being produced remotely than it does to be produced locally. So there's a huge amount of inefficiencies in this large scale, besides just the monetary inefficiencies of building huge power infrastructure. And the efficiencies accrue to small solutions distributed.
And sorry, one more point. To Alan's point, in Alabama, it's worse. It's 3. So for every 1 kilowatt hour you use in your home, the power company has to generate 3.1 on average, just to make sure you get 1 in your home. Think about all the impacts that come with that.
Yeah. So design the house to use 80% less, and then it's actually much less expensive to have to put the power generation on the building. And now you're going in the right direction.
Thank you, Alan. Nina, here's a question for you. If Alabama substantially boosts its renewable energy production, to what extent would that affect the job market? How does that open up jobs? How and where do individuals get trained to work in solar or wind? Does anyone know any training opportunities here in Alabama?
Well, I'm not an energy expert, but I would say that it would transform the job market in Alabama. We are already seeing the rollout of electric car manufacturing in the state. So what would that look like if the energy source powering a lot of these EV cars and EV infrastructure is coming from solar? What would that do to our job market and our economy in the state? I tend to think that it would help the economy in Alabama. And see, something to think about too is that in terms of jobs now, Daniel, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I'm reading, jobs in coal, or jobs in solar have surpassed jobs in coal anyway, right? And that happened like what, a year, 2 years ago? So I think that, if we did have more of a solar market in the state and we had more jobs, then I mean that would help our job market. I don't know the labor participation rates in Alabama, maybe somebody else does, but I know that the labor participation rates for the country is at about 60%. So that means out of all the people who can work, only 60% are participating. So when you think about that information and that statistic, I think it invites us to think about work and to think about jobs and the future and what that means. Is it necessary? I mean, if technology advances to the point where a lot of things are automated, which they're already starting to be, what does that mean for jobs? What does that mean for work in our country and around the world? Yeah, so that would be my answer to that. I know that we have Vulcan and Eagle Solar as two companies in Alabama that are really moving on solar and trying to open up the market here. I don't know of any job training programs off the top of my head, so I'd be curious if Daniel, you or Alan know about any opportunities.
I have a ton to say on this particular question, but I'm going to keep it very, very brief because I've been pulling a utility and monopolizing some time here. So my apologies for that. But yes, so in the 2009 stimulus back, a little over a decade ago, the federal government spent a lot of money through the Department of Labor with opening up training programs at a variety of technical and community colleges, of which many of them, there are at least a handful here in the state of Alabama that do have at least curriculum on hand that they can do some energy efficiency and renewable energy training. One of the most well-known was one in Calhoun Community College, just north of Decatur, kind of in between Decatur and Huntsville, but there were some throughout the state. So this stuff exists. We have a kind of a chicken and egg problem where we had a lot of people that went to that Calhoun program that we worked with that couldn't find work in Alabama because all the jobs that Nina was just talking about, there's tons of them out there, but they had to go move to another state to go find them. So we are literally training our young folks here in the state and then sending them away because they're able to find good paying jobs for themselves and their families somewhere else. So we have this stuff. We've got to do a better job out of it. And I'll just throw out a name for people to take a look at, a company called Grid Alternatives that's done a really good job kind of nationally in areas where solar has been hot at really reaching new folks who have not traditionally been part of the labor pool like Nina was getting at, and helping to break a generational cycle of poverty through renewable energy. So that's, really cool business model they have. Actually, the nonprofit, I'm pretty sure. So, give them a look as well.
Great.
Yeah, and I really want to lift up the brain drain, the fact that people being trained on some of this stuff are leaving the state. I participated in building the UAB Solar Home, which is now a demonstration site on campus, but we participated in the Department of Energy Solar Decathlon competition, I believe in 2018. And a lot of the engineering students in particular that worked on the house and helped install the solar panels and think through the design and engage in the competition now live in other states because there just weren't enough opportunities in Alabama. So I mean, Daniel's right, for sure.
Yeah, and let me just call it. I'll point the finger. The regulatory capture with the Public Service Commission here in Alabama, they're in the back pocket of Alabama Power. Alabama Power has basically had the Public Service Commission approve them penalizing the use of solar throughout their whole service area. So a lot of the reason for this is that Alabama Power is protecting their monopoly and that they've used regulatory capture to do so. TVA is not as bad. They're actually trying to do some good things to some degree, but in many parts of the state, Alabama Power has put a big quash on the rollout of solar.
Thank you. Here's a good follow-up question from Casey Calloway. And by the way, Casey, congratulations on your new position. I know you will be missed and welcomed at the same time. She asks, is there a way for major businesses, industry, power users, and or cities to invest in solar to push Alabama Power to change? What kind of business energy usage would it take? So how can these big companies and municipalities help force that change?
Yeah, this is where I'll take a first stab at it. I'm sorry. Just this is something that you can do, like when Alan's talking about voting with your money, right? To the extent that Alabama Power has moved, it's been because of this. It's been because Google and Walmart basically told them, you're going to do this or we're going to do it without you. And we don't, we're big enough that we don't need you. We can figure out ways to make this happen. So there are ways you can vote with your money. There's also ways that, I know Nina and GASP are doing a lot with the, trying to get the city of Birmingham to actually live up to its 100% clean energy goal. They've actually got to, grow some spine and stand up to Alabama Power and say, listen, our residents are using and spending too much.
You muted yourself there, Daniel. Are you back?
Did I die? All right, am I there? All right, sorry. I don't know where I cut off. My headphones died on me. But anyways, I was just saying, local governments, big companies, they are the ones that have a lot of purchasing power that can affect change. And so you can vote with your money. You can also go directly to like cities of Birmingham, Auburn, Tuscaloosa. They use a lot of power. So do school districts. Folks like Auburn, folks like the University of Alabama. They are the ones that really can say, hey, I spend millions and millions of dollars with this company every year. Let's make the change.
Alan, Nina, any comments? Okay. There's a question asked earlier that got an answer, but there were enough people who liked that question. I'm going to ask it again and then maybe offer a couple thoughts myself right off the bat. And it's about, can we talk about human population in this discussion? And we'll post again a webinar. Actually, we're hosting next Tuesday, the 13th at 5 o'clock by the Population Connection, talking about family planning and climate change. When it comes to population, there are lots of opinions about how many people the Earth can sustain. I've seen some experts say 4 or 5 billion people. It took until the year 1800 for human population to reach 1 billion on this planet after being around for a couple 100,000 years. It took 130 years to go to 2 billion, 30 years to go to 3, and this last billion was added in about 10 years. And so we've gone from 1 billion to 8 billion in 220 years. And there is an upper limit. A physicist at the University of Colorado back in the early 2000s wanted to know what it would look like. And at the time, the human population growth rate was 1.3%. I don't know what it is right now, but last time I looked, it was 0.9%. But at a 1.3% growth rate, he calculated that in 780 years, there'd be 1 person per square meter of dry land on the planet. So human population growth will stop at some time. There's no question there's a connection between the two. It comes down to carrying capacity. How many resources do we have? How many people use them? And how much does each person use? And of course, that's not evenly distributed around the world, because in the developed world, the United States, Europe, Australia, Japan, and so on, we consume way more than our fair share of the Earth's resources. And in that extractive economy that Nina was talking about and that Ellen was talking about, kind of a take, make, waste, we think of the Earth as an infinite source for resources and an infinite sink for our wastes. It's foundationally and fundamentally unsustainable. So human population limits are tied to the way that we use resources and the amount of waste we generate, and that we move, as Alan explained so well, away from an extractive economy to a regenerative economy, to an economy that mimics nature, uses nature's approach. So there's absolutely a connection to the number of people and the way we live on this planet. That's my view of this. Any other thoughts on this subject?
That's a big one to unpack. I'll just make one statement, because this is usually something that we cover in teaching permaculture, and it takes a while to get into. I'll just say this: the number one thing that has proven to be the key to population stability is to improve the education and the economic well-being of women. When you do that, then your ability to basically get population stability is drastically increased. So when we see areas in which this is a problem, the first thing we need to do is we need to make certain that we look at that we look at the people who have been marginalized, and we look at how we can take the people who have been pushed into that position, because they've almost always been pushed there, and we basically reestablished their food sovereignty, their food security, their energy sovereignty, their energy security, and see to the well-being of those people, in which case this issue becomes much easier to address.
And just what Alan's referring to, I think this is where you got this, Alan, is from Project Drawdown, that assessed the top 100 ways to solve climate. And when you combine family planning with educating women and girls, it is the number one solution to solving climate change. And the researchers who did crunch those numbers and looked at all the solutions, they didn't know what the number one solution was going to be, but they did know it was going to be that. So talk about a high leverage thing to do. That is it.
Yeah, and let's clarify here. We're not talking about educating women in family planning. No,
it's two different things.
Two different things. We're talking here increasing the welfare of women across the board, their access to education broadly.
Correct. And the way Project Drawdown defined it was educating women and children, and as part of that, family planning was together the number one solution. Right. It's empowering women to be economically autonomous, politically autonomous, be educated. Yeah, right. Nina?
I also want to hop in here and say that something that this question makes me think about is comparisons when in terms of consumption. I have read several times from several different places that the United States has astronomical consumption and waste rates. I mean, we consume like the amount of several Earths. I know one of y'all know the stat on that, but we consume a lot and we waste a lot. So when we think about population and we think about the fact that, as an industrialized, developed country, our consumption levels are sky high, our waste levels are sky high, and you compare that to more populous parts of the world where, you have a lot of, places in Africa where there's a lot of people, but their contribution to climate change is very low. I think that also helps kind of frame, and unpack this question of population. I think about that, and I think about just the amount, for example, of food we waste every year in the United States, and how that is a part of a contribution to climate change and disruption, and that's something that this question makes me think about too.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
So
some estimates are that we're wasting 40% of the food we produce. The other thing to point out is that the United States population is less than 5% of the global population, yet consumes over 25% of global resources.
thank you. So for our last question, we're going to combine two. One is from Lisa asking all of you, what do you see happening in PK through 12 schools? What might opportunities be there for schools? And then a follow-up to that, following up on the plea actually from Eben Goodstein, is how can we all push to make climate a class as early as possible and throughout education so that this becomes a part of what it means to be a responsible citizen in the United States, understanding these issues and their solutions?
Well, you pushed about 5 of my buttons there all at once. The first is climate should not be a class. Here is the first thing. A class is a westernized view of education in the first place. And the second place is that climate is a symptom and not the root cause. A lot of the root cause has to do with the fact that people are disconnected from the natural ecosystems that support them. And that to the degree we push people into classrooms and disconnect them from nature and make them think about climate as an abstract thing that they talk about in the abstract, to that degree, I don't think we're going to solve the problem. If you wanted to know what I would talk about for K through 12, it would be getting children the opportunity to reconnect directly and primarily to the ecosystems that support them, to think in whole systems and ask questions for themselves, at which point they will clearly see that climate is a problem, but is a symptom of the deeper systematic problems that we're looking at. And number two is, why does it have to be a class? Why is it not just simply part of the ethos of our culture? If we stick it into a class and think that the class's job is to educate children on the thing, then I think we failed.
Thank you, Alan. Well, I know for a fact, because I know this person personally, who asked the question, what can we do through K through 12 schools? This is exactly what she thinks needs to be done, is re-engaging students with the natural world. In fact, she wrote a book on it. What do you all think about education in the broadest sense? Forget the climate as a class thing, but how do we educate? Because I think Alan's point is well taken. How do we get climate? How do we get all these issues, the systemic issue that results in climate change, do you think, into the education system?
I can take a stab. I don't know that I have a good answer for this, but and Nina is probably gonna slap me on the back of the head when I say something like this, but like all those pictures that she was showing about the work that she had done out in the community, and we need young folks doing that. We need young folks standing right next to Nina when she's out there doing that, right? To see that, that's their physical connection to the effects of what we're doing and what we can do about it. And then another anecdotal thing is at Energy Alabama, we have some different like lesson plans that we've done all the way down to probably first and second grade, but they're almost always games or ways to interact and try our best, right, to connect students to principles and connect them down to the technology. Like, this is a really crude way to put it probably, but like the way I always try to explain it is like Bill Gates didn't become Bill Gates because he thought about something on a whiteboard, right? Or the people who invent new systems, the people who invent new technologies, like they're trying to get their hands dirty and learning about like down to the level of that stuff happening. Well, how do I make these things better? And so even at the high school level and some of the work that we've done, it's been exactly that. Like, we're taking students in and having them learn the processes of energy auditing and how to go through and design a solar array. That's how you're getting young folks saying, hey, wow, this is fun. Like, we can make a big impact, right? Like, this is fun to design a solar array and go in here and figure out how to do this. Oh, I can feed my family at the same time. Like, that's really how we've been able, I feel like, even though I'd love to do 10x more than we do, I feel like we've had good success at lighting up young folks by doing exactly that, literally just throwing them out there and saying, we're here to help, but you're about to do some fun stuff. Let's go.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I'll say really, really quickly that there's nothing like you know, a good teacher. I think when I look back on what I'm doing now with GASP and all the other opportunities I've had to plug in some way, shape, or form, whether it be like, you know, through internships or volunteering or at the actual classroom, like somebody who actually takes the time to educate someone on what's going on can really transform a life. And it does, all it takes sometimes is one good teacher that cares. And so, yeah, I think that that it is important for conversations like this to be had honestly, right? In public schools. Alan said that climate change is just like one symptom of the systemic problem that this systemic illness that we're trying to grapple with right now. And so I think a little bit more honesty in the public education system would help a lot in unpacking this conversation about climate change and other things, other problems that we're going through, you know, in our country. So yeah, but I do think that integrating this information into schools is important for sure.
Well, Nina, Alan, Daniel, I can't thank you enough for your contribution to this conversation and for the folks who've tuned in to have this conversation. And as I said at the beginning, I hope this will help trigger further conversation, further engagement with organizations like Energy Alabama and GASP. The permaculture stuff that Alan has going on is so cool. So there's a niche for everybody, regardless of where your interests lie. And let's just all get together and get involved because we can solve climate by 2030.